Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show about and for writers and those looking to learn something about the experience of writing and publishing in the modern age. For those who may not know, the show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms, and you can subscribe to either or both hopefully, so you never miss a thing. My guest today is Matt Witten. And he is one of the more versatile and skilled writers on the scene today. He's written extensively for television with credits that include House and Law and Order and Pretty Little Liars and CSI Miami, among many, many others, as well as stage plays and even films. And of course, for our purposes here today, he's also the author of two excellent crime thrillers, The Necklace and Killer Story, which I just finished reading last night and I really, really liked, and we're going to talk about that for sure. So, Matt, welcome to the Open Mic. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Rich. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's get started by talking about Killer Story, which is your latest novel, which is about a struggling journalist who, in an effort to save her career, crosses a whole lot of ethical and eventually legal boundaries in pursuit of a story that she wants to turn into a popular podcast. So for the uninitiated out there, I've given them the basics, but for the uninitiated out there, tell us a little bit more about the book.
Sure. The main character is a woman named Petra, who is, as you say, a journalist, and she's been having a real tough time. She keeps getting laid off, like so many journalists do now. So she get laid off at her first job at a newspaper in Oxford, Mississippi. And then she gets laid off at another job in Bozeman, Montana. And then she gets laid off at a internet startup in Seattle. She gets really lucky and she gets this job at a newspaper in Boston, and which is great, a big city, but she's about to get laid off from there. And all of this is through no fault of her own. And she has been dreaming since she was 8 years old, and something happened when she was 8. She's been dreaming of being a journalist one day. That's her mission. Like so many people that I meet in their 20s that want to become journalists, and I'm like, wow, that's impressive. You're going into this very difficult field with so many obstacles, but they have a sense of mission. So that's true of this character. And she gets the idea that the way she's going to really get her journalism career happening and keep from getting fired at this one Boston job is to start a podcast, to start a true crime podcast. And she convinces her newspaper editor it's a good idea. And specifically, she's going to investigate the cold case murder of a young woman. She was a freshman at Harvard when she was killed, who Petra knew 4 years ago when the girl was only 14 years old. So Petra has a personal stake in solving this murder. And she really wants to solve the murder and get justice for this girl that she knew and loved like a little sister. And she really wants that. And she's coming from idealism. But during the course of the book, she also wants to succeed in journalism, which means she wants to get clicks. And she faces what every journalist faces now, every journalist in the United States and elsewhere. You got to get clicks. You have to. Getting clicks can be as important as getting the truth. And if you want to survive in this business, do well, that's what you have to do. So she starts to get confused in her mission. Is it getting justice for the girl, or is it getting clicks for herself so she can survive as a journalist and do well and not get laid off again and have some kind of stability in her life and be able to live in Boston with her boyfriend? And so she has all these things going on with her, and ultimately she starts to go down like a questionable, as you say, a questionable route in her life and in her pursuing of justice and clicks. And she starts to go downhill a little bit in some ways until the end of the book when she redeems herself. So it's a book about this idealistic woman who is in this very difficult profession, gets caught up in the moral and ethical and financial craziness of it all, but ultimately redeems herself at the end.
Well, I related to a lot of it. As you know, I've been a reporter for a very long time. I'm a political reporter and editor. I've been covering the California state I've been covering a lot of capitals around the country for many, many years. Now it's just California, which is I'm very happy about. But boy, there were times reading this, I just wanted to shake this girl, like, don't do that, don't do that thing you're doing. Oh my God. Uh, that said, um, I have probably maybe the same kind of love-hate relationship with my media brethren as you. Sounds like maybe you do, because, well, I don't want to make this about me. Let me ask you, was there any particular event in the media that moved you or inspired this story?
Yes, I think it was seeing the documentary on TV, Making a Murderer, which was on Netflix. And the thesis of this six-part documentary on Netflix was that the guy who had been convicted, there were two guys convicted of a murder in, I think it was Chicago, and the thesis was that both of these guys were innocent. Well, watching the documentary, I was like, oh my God, they are innocent. This is terrible what happened, a miscarriage of justice. So then, after the documentary is over, then come out true crime podcasts about the documentary, newspaper articles about the documentary, people with knowledge of the actual case speaking out. And it turns out that the people that made this documentary omitted a lot of the truth. They just left out anything that would actually make it seem like these guys were actually guilty. And they just left it out. They left it out. They left out things that you would want to know if you're forming an opinion. And had they put them in, they would have had a crappy documentary. Nobody would have watched because they would have said, of course, these guys are guilty. And I just want to say for people that watched it, I actually think one of them may very well have been innocent, the mentally disabled guy. But the main guy, to me, clearly guilty when you hear the whole story. So they cannot include that in the documentary. They've got nothing. Nobody's going to watch. So that was fascinating to me. So that was really what got me started. And I don't want to go too hard on journalists. I think anybody in the situation where you're hanging on to your career, if you're passionate about your career, where you're hanging on to something for dear life, you're going to do anything to make it happen. So it's really, to me, it's about the system, that causes people to act in a certain way.
Well, and I guess that's a little bit too where I was starting to go maybe with my intro on that question, because it is a hard business, and I've been very, very fortunate over the course of my career, in that I have watched many, many of my colleagues lose their jobs, and I've been fortunate. I never have. I've managed to write out the worst of everything, or better or worse. But I do understand, and especially now at the ripe old age I am now, I look around and I see how many of the reporters that cover the Capitol, and even when I worked in D.C. and was covering that, the federal government, how many of them were so young. They were so young, and this was I worked in D.C. 10 years ago, so, and not much has changed. If anything, they've gotten even younger, right? And it is a very tenuous position right now. I mean, hedge funds are taking over newspapers left and right. They drain all the resources out of them. They get rid of staff. It's really a kind of a tragic thing. And so in that regard, I thought you really nailed her character and her insecurities, and, really set up well why she might do things that, like I say, me as a reporter, I'm going, don't do that. What are you doing? But as a human being, you can see, of course, she's terrified of, disappointing her mother, disappointing her fiance, disappointing everybody in her life, because she might get fired again.
Yep,
And
that's absolutely true. And I think, anybody who's been laid off for whatever reason can relate to it, which is another thing that got me involved in writing it. I've been writing for TV for 20 years. And if you write for TV, you're going to get laid off at least a couple of times. So I've been laid off 4 times in 20 years. And even if it's something like, the show gets canceled, so all the writers are gone, or, a new head writer is hired and they get rid of all the old writers and bring in, a totally new staff, it's still difficult. So yeah, whatever the circumstance, whatever the profession, if you feel up against it and you're anxious and you're trying to raise a family or start a family in Petra's case, yeah, it's very emotionally stressful, and leads people to do questionable things.
well, your first thriller novel, The Necklace, is based somewhat on true events. And maybe tell us all about that one as well, because I haven't read it. I'll admit I haven't read that one yet, but it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I read an article, speaking of small town newspapers and their importance. I read an article in the Glens Falls Post-Star back in 2012 about a woman named Tina Curl, who uh, her daughter had been killed 20 years previously, and the killer was about to be executed in North Dakota. And she was raising money so that she could travel from where she lived in upstate New York to North Dakota in order to see the execution. And Tina was not at all a wealthy person by any stretch of the imagination. So she was trying to raise $600 so that she could drive there. She had some health issues and could not fly. So she had a fundraiser at a local bar uh, to help raise money for her to be able to go from upstate New York to North Dakota to witness the execution. And I just found that story, extremely moving. So I put the newspaper article up on the bulletin board next to my desk, and it was there for about 8 years. And I wasn't sure what the story would be. And one time in 2020, I went out for coffee with a friend of mine named John Henry Davis. And I said to John Henry, I have this character that I love. I've been thinking about it for 8 years, and I don't know what the story would be. Maybe it's some. I told him what the story was so, as it existed at the time. I said, I don't know what this book or movie would be. It would be maybe some kind of artsy kind of road movie where she's traveling and maybe she learns about life, and maybe she meets the brother or the guy who's going to be executed and she falls in love. I didn't know what it would be. And John Henry said, oh, I know what happens. He said she's going to find something out that makes her think maybe the guy who's about to be executed on Saturday is really innocent, and the real killer may still be at large. And our hero, this diner waitress from a small town with no money, she's got to figure out the truth. Even though the FBI isn't helping her, even though her mother thinks she's crazy, she's got to figure out the truth before Saturday at 5 or at 5:30, or an innocent man is going to be executed. So when John Henry told me that as an idea, I was like, no, I don't think so. That sounds, I don't know. But by the next morning, I decided he was totally right. So I wrote the necklace. And then the other funny thing that happened with the necklace was that after I wrote it, I discovered that there was a woman in Idaho named Carol Dodge, I think was her name, who had been spending the past 10, 15 years of her life trying to get a guy off death row who was there for killing her daughter. And this was a real life story that actually happened. And she actually finally succeeded. She got the guy off. His name escapes me right now. She got him off, and she found the actual killer of the cops that she eventually got to work on the case, found the actual killer. So the guy got off, and the actual killer is now in prison. So I thought that was an amazing case of life imitating art. So
Yeah, no
so yeah,
kidding.
that's how the necklace came into being. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. That's really that's really amazing that you found it after. So that's the beautiful thing is you could say honestly, I know that I found that out. I'd already written the
Yeah.
book. I wasn't really stealing it from the headlines because I'd already written the book.
Yeah, my buddy told me because my buddy is tangentially involved in Carol Dodge's story. So after he read the book, he told me.
Fascinating. Well, so I noted in the intro that you have a really vast background in writing, television, which you mentioned, of course, novels, but also writing plays and even movies. Uh, Tell me a little bit about that history, and is there one of those that is your favorite or that you feel the most comfortable in?
I've enjoyed them all. I would say right now, what I enjoy the most is really to sit at a coffee shop and write novels. It's my When I'm writing novels, it comes directly from my heart. It's something that, for whatever reason, I really care about. The necklace spoke to me. I thought about it for 8 years, and Killer Story had personal resonance with me, and I just care about it. When I'm writing for TV, I'm writing somebody else's vision. and I may, I work my tail off to write the best House episode I could possibly write, the best Law and Order or Pretty Little Liars episode, but it's not exactly coming from my heart. I try to make it that way. Everything I write, I try to really connect and just find the deepest part of me that is into it, and just, go for it really strongly. Uh, but it's different. I don't even have to like go through that step. It's already there when I'm writing a novel. So I would say that's been that's my favorite thing. I loved writing plays too. That was also from my heart, and I enjoyed that. The great thing about plays is, when the play is going good, you're in this experience where everybody's experiencing it together, and you're in the theater, and you just are one with the audience, and it just feels really good. Unless they're coughing or shuffling in their seats, in which case it doesn't feel so good.
Right.
And writing a novel is a little bit different. When I'm writing a novel, my favorite thing to do in life, in terms of consuming art, is to read a novel, is to put my feet up and read a novel. So in that sense, I'm doing what feels most natural to me. And when I do write them, I I picture somebody else, sitting back on their sofa with their feet up and with a cup of tea, and I like that form of communication to them, and it feels I don't know, it feels good to picture my readers enjoying it in that way. Um, and
Is there
yeah.
anything in particular from TV writing that you've brought to your novels that maybe you didn't have before you took up the art of writing the novel?
Well, that may be. I wrote 4 amateur sleuth mysteries back in the late 90s and early 2000s before I got into TV writing. And I'm not sure how they compare to my current ones. They're just very different. They were amateur sleuth cozies, and these are thrillers that I'm writing now. But in terms of, I'll say what TV taught me about novel writing that I certainly use is it certainly helps you write dialogue, because that's what, TV shows are about. And, you know, in TV, you can't skim. Like when you read a book, you can skim a book. Like I enjoyed that Dan Brown book, The Da Vinci Code, and I think it was maybe 650 pages. I probably skimmed 300 of them. Like there was a lot of stuff in there I didn't care for. I liked War and Peace, but I probably skipped just about every other chapter of War and Peace. Um, but you can't do that in a TV show, because I mean, now people have phones, so you could do the equivalent of skimming a little more. But in general, with TV, you pretty much have to be watching it. Um, there's a lot less skimming involved. Same with the movie, and same especially with stage plays, because stage plays, people still don't bring their cell phones. So I was always like, every single second has to really be good. Every single second. I can't let people wander for a second. So I think my books, my 2 books, Killer Story and The Necklace, have less parts that you would skim, that people skim, than other books. I mean, I'm told that they're very fast paced, and yeah, and people don't skim them. And I think I learned that from TV. And I think the other thing I learned from TV is a sense of structure, because especially for network TV, which I've written for most of my TV history, is it's just very structured. Every act, the definition of an act in television is the interval between commercials. Every act comes to like a height at the end. It's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Our bad guy's in trouble. They're going to get him. And then commercial. And then the next act, same thing. Da, 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 da. If it's House, oh my God, he's going to die. We're going to give him this. Maybe he won't die. What's going to happen? He's puking his guts out. Oh my God, go to commercial. And so you get like, there are 4 or 5 acts in a TV show. So you have 4 or 5 of these moments that are happening like this. And so when you write, and I think they correspond to something in our brains that really wants twists. So when I write a novel, I think I have that same sense of structure, the building tension and then releasing it, and then building it again, releasing and building. And I think that, so I think I bring that. There's some mystery novels that I read that I think don't quite have that sense. Like there's some mystery novels I read that have just great characters, really fun dialogue, very entertaining. But I kind of lose the thread of the plot sometimes as early as page 70. And
You know
so
what? I want to follow up on that a little bit because I've had now several authors on the show who came from TV. And I'm really starting to notice that, how much more fast paced the writing is from people like yourself that have spent years in television. And, you know, I read a ton, and I have to take advantage of limited amounts of time to read. I'm a very busy person, as most people are, and so a lot of my times to read are very particular times. And so, early mornings, right before bed, slots here and there. And I am really starting to notice novels that don't have that fast pace to them. And it made me think of something that Elmore Leonard said, which was, leave out the parts that people skip, which is what you were just talking about. So I've really grown to appreciate people with a TV background writing in the thriller thing, because you really keep things going at a really, again, maybe we've all been trained by TV and our short attention span. I don't know, but I notice more now when I read novels that have way, way more, narration or expository stuff than we need. And I really appreciate the TV people a lot more than I ever did before.
Well, thank you. I do too. If I find out that a novelist, if I'm at a bookstore or the library and thinking what to buy, if I see that the person is a playwright or a TV writer or a screenwriter, yeah, I tend to be a little bit biased, more biased toward getting it.
And speaking of plays, now I did a lot of college theater. I love the stage. I've still, one of my very favorite things to do is to go to stage plays. I love small community theater. I love, the bigger shows. It doesn't matter. I really do enjoy it. And, you mentioned about dialogue in TV, and of course with plays, that is absolutely critical to have, but it's a different kind of dialogue. So many stage plays, of course, have a richer, I guess is my perspective, a richer dialogue, or a more, I don't want to say wordy, but maybe a more lyrical kind of a dialogue. Tell me a little bit about working that into your work. Is there some of that when that thought process when you go to write novels?
Well, sometimes I'll be writing a novel and I'll give it to my wife to read a chapter, and she said, "Oh, this section here, it sounds more like a play." So I would say, if I really think about it, I may be a little bit damaged by my playwriting background, because maybe I do get a little bit lyrical in my first draft. So that would actually be something I have to get rid of. But how has writing a play benefited me? I mean, in general, again, it's just anytime you write dialogue, you learn from it. And I would say that's true of plays too, but maybe you have to be a little bit careful as a playwright writing dialogue, that you don't get carried away by the beauty of your words.
So, some process questions. I always ask writers process questions, and I had a handful I was going to ask you, but I decided to throw all those away because I want to ask you some that I never ask anybody. And specifically, just in casual conversation, every successful author I've ever talked to, one of the first things they'll bring up is all the things that weren't successful, the novels or the plays or whatever it is that they have in a drawer that will never again see the light of day. So I'm curious, how do you know when to walk away from a project? When you say this just isn't working and I'm going to put it away, and I'm never going to look at it again. How do you know when that moment has arrived?
That's a really, really great question. I would say that when I was in my 20s and even 30s, possibly my 40s, I really did not have a way of figuring that out. I just could not tell. There were a couple projects I worked on. I can think of one spec TV pilot I was working on that I probably did 3 drafts of, which were very different from each other. And it was just not fundamentally a good project to be working on. It didn't have a good enough central idea. The main character, his issues just weren't gripping enough. I wrote a stage play that was maybe good for me in some way psychologically to write, because I got things out of my head, but it wasn't really something that was ever going to be produced. It was too internal to me. And that one I also spent, a long time writing on, probably off and on for a year. Um, I would say it's daunting when you do have a project like that, because it's like, man, there's like, almost a year of my life that like I was kind of not productive really. And you just have to accept that it's part of your journey and you had to write it for whatever reason. And there's something you're going to learn from that, either as a writer or as a human being, that's going to help you further. So I had great difficulty in the past. But you ask how I know now, because I don't think I waste a lot of time now working on projects that are bad ideas. I don't think that's happened. I don't remember the last one that happened. It hasn't happened for a while. And I'll tell you how I think I have sort of overcome that, which is when I get an idea for a novel or a movie or a television pilot, I um, pitch it to somebody. I pitch it just in a sentence or a paragraph to my wife or to a friend at a coffee shop, and I'll just get their initial take on whether it makes sense. And if it seems to make sense, and maybe they have some feedback on changing it a little bit, but if it seems to make sense, then I write a page and a half about single-spaced description of this idea, and I'll read it aloud to my writing group, or give it to friends to read, or give it to friends to read, or my wife, and I'll get their feedback on it. And if they trash it at that point, then I'm willing to have it trashed. I'm like, okay, I guess it's probably not the right idea. If they say, huh, this sounds interesting, uh, then I write up a approximately 5 to 8 page single-spaced description of this project. And then I give it to people, the same sets of people, and I get their feedback on it. And if I'm getting the green light from people, then I work on it, and it turns out to be a good project. But I've certainly stopped projects at those early stages, especially the first two stages, because I was not getting positive feedback from people. So I think that's how I've succeeded in having projects that made sense.
Well, that's an interesting system. And, I think that's one of the real challenges for people is knowing, when to walk away from something for sure. Another aspect of maybe of that question is, was there ever a time when you wanted to just quit writing, walk away from the industry, walk away from, go find something else to do? And the reason I often ask people how they handle rejection. And so I guess I'm coming at it maybe from a different perspective, because rejection is just part of it. It's always going to happen, right? So maybe rather than that, was there ever a time when you felt like, I'm not going to make it, right? This is going to be something different. I got to walk away and do something different.
Well, there have certainly been times that I've been discouraged. When I was 17, I had an undiagnosed illness. And I promised myself that if I ever got better again, I would remember that reading and writing were core to my being, and I would stick with them. And I did, in fact, get better two months later. And I remember that period. And even during my down times as a writer where I haven't been making money, I just remembered that was at the core of my being, was reading and writing, and I would keep doing it. So I kept doing that, even though I had some tough years. And in my 20s, most years I was under the poverty line, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as I was not making a lot of money, but I stuck to it. I would say the closest I ever came to leaving the business was I had a downtime when I was in my late 30s. And so I decided to apply to law school after my dad, when I was a kid, used to tell me to apply to law school all the time. So anyway, I finally did. And I got into law school. And I don't know that I would have gone, but I actually did get in with a nice scholarship. It was $20,000 to go, and I got a $17,500 scholarship. I would have thought about it, but the very next week, literally, I got an offer to join Law and Order, to come to Los Angeles and be on the Law and Order writing staff. And then literally a week after that, my first novel, Breakfast at Madeline's, was accepted for publication. So, I told the university I'm going to, instead of being a real lawyer, I'm going to be a fake lawyer for Law and Order. So that was the closest that I came. I did think about getting a job being a professor of TV writing sometime about 10 years ago. Um, or maybe it was, but I didn't stick with that idea, and instead I switched to novel writing, and I'm thrilled that I did. I mean, I'm having honestly the time of my life right now as a writer. I'm writing stuff that I love. I feel like my talents and abilities are good. I feel like I've learned some things about human nature that I didn't know before, and so I feel like I'm writing the best I've ever written right now. So at this point, I'm just so happy that I stuck with it, through the down times. I mean, I've had good times too, obviously, but I'm doing great. But it's a very complicated question. I have a friend who is in their 40s, and they said to me, I've been trying to make it as a writer all this time. How do I know when it's time to stop? And my personal opinion is not to go too deeply into it, but is this writer would be better off stopping. That's my personal opinion. Um, I think there's something that's blocking them, and I don't think it's going to work out. But I can't tell somebody that. I,
Right.
I said it's hard to know. It's a decision everybody has to make for themselves. But I'll finish just by I'm giving you a long answer, but I'll finish just by saying one thing, which is if anybody wants to read a book on this subject, George Orwell wrote a really interesting book called "Keep the Asphodistra Flying," and the hero of the book is a guy who wants desperately to be an artist. It's like a typical book about a starving artist who's trying to make it. And the plot of this book, I'm going to give it away, but it's still a great book. The plot of this book is, in the end, he realized, you know what? I'm not going to make it. So he gets this boring, whatever. He gets a 9 to 5 job that he's been resisting his entire, life, and he gets a wife, and starts to raise a family, and he's really happy.
Well, but that in a way there's a real moral here. I mean, I guess my perspective has always been if something makes you miserable all of the time or most of the time, you maybe really should rethink that. I mean, now I talk to a lot of writers and they say, oh, they're driven and they're not very happy when they don't write. Oh, okay. The thing I've always told people, because people ask me about all the time for some reason, like I'm successful, but they ask me these questions, and I always say, look, the one thing I've learned over all these years is going into this business, you have to know what you want. Number one, you have to know what you want. If you are only going to be happy getting the big agent and getting the contract with Simon and Schuster and all that stuff, great, fabulous. That's the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life, but okay, as long as you know that's what you want, then fine. If all you really want to do is get your work out there and you don't really care about all these things, and self-publication is fine with you, or some hybrid, whatever, that's fine too. It's what you want. Because if you do the thing you don't want, you're not going to be happy. It's not going to be any fun. Right. And then what's the whole point? So much hard work, at some point, if it isn't fun too, why are you doing it? Right. That would be my question, all that.
Yeah,
Along
I
those
agree. I
lines,
agree, by the way. And I just like to add that the key thing is you have to enjoy the writing. It's like you have to look forward in the morning to sitting down at the desk or coffee shop, wherever it might be. You have to look forward to writing, and it has to be fun. And if it's fun, that's all it's all about, because you can't guarantee the Simon Schuster, you can't guarantee a smaller publication, you can't guarantee anything. So you just have to enjoy writing. So that'd be my other answer. If you're enjoying writing, do it. And if it stresses you out too much, I suppose don't do it. But if you enjoy it, do it.
well, and along those lines, so we met recently at a writers conference, and I've been to several. I know you have too. And the one thing I really like about Left Coast is, the absence of agents and editors, because to me that makes for a very different dynamic than what a lot of writers conferences are about. Because when agents and editors are there, it's like, they're the prettiest girl at every dance, right? Everybody wants to try to make that contact. And I've never had more people talking, looking over my shoulder while they're talking to me than at a writers conference where there are agents, right? And I understand it, right? Oh, there's the person I really want to talk to. I'll get back to you. I get that. I absolutely get it. It was really great though to have that opportunity to just interact with writers, editors who are not editors, writers and readers, and have a very low key thing. And it made me realize, this is another part of the business that I think sometimes when you're just getting into it, because everybody starts to think about, oh, I'm going to go to these writers' conferences, and that's another thing where I go, I think you really need to evaluate what your purpose is for going to an event like this. A, they're not cheap, but B, they're time consuming, and if you don't know what it is you want, you may end up not getting anything at all that's enjoyable for you. What's your perspective on these? Because you were somebody who was out there interacting with a lot of people and talking to a lot of folks. What's your perspective on the time you spent at writers' conferences?
Uh, I enjoy them. I enjoy hanging out with the other writers. And I enjoy playing poker in the evening with other writers. And I get inspired. I don't even know why exactly, but I get inspired when I go to the writers' conferences, and in the weeks or maybe even months afterwards, I just have an extra hit of motivation afterwards. Just I'm not sure why. Just listening to other writers talk about their work or their writing, or seeing so many writers that I respect in one place, and it just gives me a little shot in the arm. Uh, so I guess that's why I enjoy them. Someone also described it as uh, as seeing cousins. Like I might see my cousins like 3 times a year, and I might see these fellow writers, 3 times a year at Left Coast Crime and BoucherCon, maybe Thriller Fest, and so it's getting together with these people that I like and really enjoy. Which are the conferences, if I may ask, were the ones that seemed a little bit to people looking over everybody's shoulders for the next agent or whatever?
Oh, well, the one I'll say because it's no longer around was the San Diego State University Writers Conference, which was a great conference, but it had a lot of agents. And so I noticed that every year that I ever went, which I went periodically over the course of about 20 years in Maui, which is, I don't think that one's on anymore. I'd have to think about some of the other ones, but the common thread there was definitely that there were a lot of agents and editors, and again, I totally understand. I totally
Yeah.
understand why would you want to be there talking to me when the agent that you're trying to lure into reading your manuscript is standing right there, right, not talking to anybody. I get it. I do get it, but
Yeah.
it's a very different vibe.
Yeah, even a place like Left Coast Crime or BoucherCon, there can be a little of that, a little bit of the frenetic. Oh, I'm trying to hustle in some way, but I know what you mean. They are relatively relaxed, and yeah, I definitely enjoyed just hanging out. Was nice.
Really quickly here, because I don't want to keep you forever, but I have one more serious question, and then I'll close. But the serious question is this: you've been in the business now a long time, and across a lot of, as we've noted, TV, film, plays, novels. Um, what is your perspective on the state of the industry now? Because it has changed so much over the last couple of decades. Are things better for writers now, you think, or are they maybe not as good as they were for writers when you were first getting into this part of the industry?
Well, let's see. My the 4 books that were published 20 years ago, if I were to compare that experience to now, which that's the best I can do from personal experience, I think there was more money in the business then, in the sense that what I mean is that the editors at that time of my books and everybody else's books, they'd give you like they'd really read your book and give you a lot of notes. Like I remember when I was having books published back then, I'd get like 4-page single-spaced notes from the editor, and they would make my book better. And I don't get that from editors now. And I have heard this across the board from writers. So I would say you don't get that kind of support that you used to. In terms of um, the publicity, I think even back then, and I was published by a major back then, I think even back then I had to organize my own book tours, even though I was published by, God, I'm blanking. Who published it? Penguin Putnam. Even though I was published by Penguin Putnam, I still had to do that, and Signet. That's the. So I don't know. I don't think writers, obviously, unless you're super famous, you don't get a higher level of support. In terms of how hard it is to get published, or uh, or how long it takes publishers to read your stuff, um, I'm not really sure how to compare that. So I'm just giving you a lot of I'm not sure, as I'm afraid. I don't know the differences, except my guess is that books probably make a little bit less money than they used to. So my guess would be that, honestly, my guess would be that things have gotten a little bit worse in every way, because I think when there's more money in the industry, that means that there's more support for writers, there's more support for editors, there's more support for assistant editors. I think there's more support for everybody in the business. That would just be my theoretical opinion. Um, so I guess that's the best I can do answering that very good question.
Well, I have one final one, and I think this one will be maybe a little, maybe not. Maybe I was going to say it might be a little easier, but I don't know, maybe not. I always like to end by offering you an option. I can put you together, let's say, with any one of these of the following three people. You tell me for a conversation, dinner, drink, whatever you want. But you can only choose one of the following three. Who would
May I ask? May I ask? Is one of them Bernie Sanders?
No.
Darn.
One of them is not Bernie Sanders.
All right.
But yeah, you might appreciate the three I'm going to offer you. So the options I'll give you are the great playwright Arthur Miller, the very famous bank robber John Dillinger, or the very famous late TV journalist Jessica Savage. I can put you together with one of those three for a conversation and about.
Well, for me, I would love to talk to Arthur Miller. I loved his definition of tragedy, which is that I'm not going to say it well now, but it's you do something and it messes you up. But the thing that got me about his definition of tragedy was he said it couldn't be an accident. He said if you're walking down the street and a brick just falls off a building and lands on your head, he says that's not a tragedy, because there's nothing that you can get out of that. There's not a cause and effect that you can really get. It's just a random incident. And that always struck me. I said, there's got to be some way where you can make a tragedy about that. It just doesn't seem right to me that a brick falling on your head could not be the subject of a tragedy. And the other thing that I've really come to be interested in, and I'd love to talk with Arthur Miller about, is that in Death of a Salesman, he said he was laughing his ass off when he was writing it. He said he was just so funny. And when you watch the show, it's such a tragedy. This poor salesman is so deluded and so struggling and trying to make his life work. And his whole family is suffering. His relationship with his son, Biff, and his wife, and everything is just so difficult. And it's just such tragedy. But then I can still picture him. He's sitting at his desk and he's just laughing about this thing. He's laughing and laughing. And I kind of am fascinated with that, especially lately, because with Killer Story, I just love this character. I just love Petra, my main character, so much. And there's people that have, real problems. I mean, they love the book, but they're like, man, this girl's doing some things that are really wrong, and she really pissed me off. I said, how can she piss you off? She's such a great person. She said, yeah, she's just in a difficult circumstance. She's a great person. So I'm fascinated by writers that write something and it has a different, the way they're feeling it when they write it, it comes out different when people read it. So I would love to talk to them about Death of a Salesman. I really love to just sit back with them sometime and figure out a way to turn a brick landing on somebody's head into a tragedy. So good question. Thank you. I appreciate the question. I appreciate thinking about Arthur Miller too.
Well, I appreciate you taking time today to talk to me here on the open mic, and I'm gonna wrap it up here, and I'm gonna wrap it up by saying thank you, Matt Witten, for coming on the show. I loved Killer Story. I'm looking forward to reading The Necklace. I really enjoyed having the conversation. And I want to remind everybody, if you haven't done so, please hit subscribe both on YouTube and on whatever podcatcher you're using. If you'd be so kind as to leave a review, that would be really great, because that helps other people find the show. And for my money, you're not going to get a better course on, writing and understanding what's going on in publishing in this day and age than talking to people who actually live it day in and day out. And that is what the open mic is all about. So please do me a favor and do other aspiring writers and readers a favor, and hit subscribe, and please leave me a review at whatever podcatcher or YouTube you use to witness the show. I love that. For Matt Witten, for myself, Rich Eisen, I will leave you with one last thing. Tomorrow, it is not promised to any of us, so please make today count. I'm Rich Eisen. This has been the Open Mic. Take care.